Welcome to a new episode of Parenting and You with me, Dr. Shefali. You know, one of the hardest things in life is experiencing the loss and death of a loved one. You know, in the West especially, we are taught to be afraid of death. We're all running away from the pain that death brings about. We run away by distracting ourselves or suppressing the feelings or not talking about it too much because somehow we see it as a weakness or as a limitation, something to be avoided, discarded, ignored. But in the East, we deal with death and loss in a slightly different way. Instead of discarding our feelings, instead of running away from the pain that these experiences bring about, we try to integrate the feelings. We try to express, talk about it, and be in community around the loss and grief so that people don't feel so alone, so isolated, as if it's a limitation or something to be ashamed about. This is what this episode is going to address, and it'll offer anyone who's experiencing a challenging time around grief and loss with a new perspective. Coming up next, I'm going to talk to a mother who is in the throes of her grief around the death of her son who she lost at birth 6 months ago. It's never easy when life throws us an unexpected twist or a turn and we find ourselves facing death or loss. We're going to talk to Stacy now. She's a mother of 2 children and she's currently grieving the loss of one of her twin boys who was stillborn. Hello, Stacy. Tell us a little bit about your journey. I know it's been incredibly difficult for you.
It has been difficult. Like you said, I am a mother of 2, grieving one of my boys. And I have to say, ever since it happened, it's been very difficult connecting with my boy, my 4-year-old, and even sometimes with my 6-month-old because it feels like I've lost the patience because I'm so focused in getting things going for them that for me, I basically have no time because when it happened, it felt like I had to stop grieving and take care of my boys. So
Yes.
I've been putting them first since then, but at the same time, I feel like I'm struggling connecting with them. I'm less patient. I very anxious and they feel it.
Yes. So that's what happens, right? Because life threw you this wild curve. One of your twins was stillborn. So you were in trauma. And then you were a new mother. And you had a 4-year-old to take care of. So you still had to go on with being a mother, but you experienced a huge loss. And there was no time for you to process the loss and grieve the loss and integrate the loss, right? So when we split off from our trauma, that doesn't mean the trauma goes away. It's affecting you, but on a deeper level, right? You're feeling like you need some space, but you don't have the space to grieve.
Yes, that's exactly that. Even sometimes, let's say that I try to make time for myself, but it feels like it's always so too short. Like some days I feel like I need, a whole day for myself to start crying, but I only have like a few minutes. Okay, cry, and then okay, let's bring back that smile and go to taking care of the kids. I don't want them to, I mean, some days, of course, when I can't, like when it feels like the cup is completely overfilled, I just let it go in front of them because I just can't. But
Yes.
some days, I just have to, okay, go in the bathroom, do a quick cry, and then go back to the kids. Let's pretend that everything is okay.
And whenever we try to pretend that things are okay, it always backfires because our emotions demand to be nurtured, demand to be understood, and demand to be integrated. So pretending that we don't have emotions will never let the emotions go away. In fact, they become even stronger. So when people come to me around issues of death and loss and grief. There are two places that I bring up that are essential steps on your journey. So the first one is going to be a little painful for you. So are you okay with me taking you to a more painful place? Because I think it's necessary, because our culture teaches us, let's run away from the grief, let's hide from the pain. But the only way to heal pain is to go through it. So can I take you to a slightly more painful place right now for a few minutes?
Here.
Okay. And for all those listening, I want you to tune in, because this is going to help you on your own journey in grieving and loss. So I'm sure you had visions of how these twins would be and how life would be with these twin boys. Did you name both of them before they were born, or did you wait?
I did name both of them.
So the boy who's currently alive, who's 6 months old, what is his name?
He's Nikolai.
Nikolai. And what is the name of the boy who was born still?
Niklaus.
Nicholas. Okay, very close. So now every time you say Nikolai, I'm sure that also brings up the memory of Nicholas.
It does.
Yes. So what I want us to realize is that every being that we've encountered but has now passed lives now in our memory. And that's where we need to cherish them, and that's where we need to celebrate them. So is there something you can do every day to remember Nicholas, to write a little poem to him or a little letter to him every morning? Because he's still living in your memory, and it hurts you that you can't touch him, you can't feel him, but he's there in your memory. So how can we allow that memory to get more processed, to get more integrated? One of the ways is that we write to that person. We talk about them in our quiet moments. We talk to them, and we make this little space in our day, put his picture up there, talk to him about what Nikolai did yesterday, and just create that connection with him so that you always have that within you. The other day I was with someone whose father had just passed on, and she felt like you. She needed to be brave. She needed to be positive for her children. And I told her, you can only do that when you allow yourself to experience that relationship until that relationship fades on its own. So I'm asking you, do you think you can allow for that, where it's just you and him together for 15 minutes a day, where you can kiss his picture or kiss a memory or kiss just, his vision in your mind, so that he's more with you rather than you pushing him aside so you can be brave?
I can try to do that.
Have you ever done that since his passing?
I've talked to him. I've talked to him a lot. I don't know, I guess sometimes it's painful to do it, but in terms of talking, it's something that I've done.
And can you connect with him and just feel him with you and within your space and your memories? And he doesn't have to become a disconnected part of you, is what I'm trying to say. He doesn't have to be something scary for you to remember. He doesn't have to be a painful memory that you have to suppress. And the only way to allow that grief to become more part of your life rather than something you're scared of is to integrate it. So bring him in. You can even tell Nikolai, oh my goodness, what would Nicholas do, or what would Nicholas say? It's okay. You don't have to be scared of this grief. It's okay for your family to allow it in. And the more we speak of it, the less scared we are. And the less scared we are, the less we're suppressing. And then it doesn't come out as impatience or frustration later. You understand? It's a different way of grieving people. It's bringing them into the situation rather than pretending like we don't have to ever remember them because it's too painful. The other day I was talking to a young mother who lost her partner and was raising a 5-year-old. And she was asking me, is it okay if I bring up my partner's name, my husband's, my ex, now he's passed on, his name? And I said, absolutely. Celebrate him, talk about him, bring him in, because he's part of our journey. He's part of your journey.
I mean, that's one thing I think It's a good approach, but one thing that I feared was, especially for my 4-year-old, I wondered if maybe talking to him, because even him, I felt like he was very conscious, because at the beginning he would talk a lot about it. And even when it happened, I didn't really have the courage to talk to people about it, and that I didn't even let his school know what had happened.
Mm.
And at teacher's conference with its teacher, and she brought it up, and I was shocked because I didn't let the school know. So he was actually talking about it. So a lot of time when he brings it up, it's like I feel like maybe he cannot handle it, so I just try to shut it down. But
Yes.
maybe it's something that I should try to avoid doing.
Exactly. He is showing you that he's actually okay being sad. He's accepting the sadness. See, that's what's so beautiful about our children. They allow all their feelings in, like guests in the house, and they allow them a space. But we adults, because we can't handle the big feelings, we shove them aside and then actually make it worse for our children and ourselves. Your son is telling you, hey, in a way, children accept life and death way more easier than we do because they're not attached to how things should be. They enter how they are. They are not focused on the as if, they are focused on the is, on the as is. And you, mommy, need to learn from your 4-year-old. Talk about him, make songs for him, leave him a rose, a flower, cook. And when you cook and bake, you can talk about, oh, he would have loved that too. And the more you talk about it and allow it to be part of your existence, the less scary it becomes. And then mommy is allowed to cry whenever crying comes to her or tears come up. Mommy doesn't feel she has to be brave or pretend. And you're teaching your children this is what love is. When we love someone, it hurts us when they're not with us. Your children will realize this is love. My mommy will miss me when I'm not there. And when I go to school, mommy cries when I go to school too. And you'll tell your two living children, I miss you the same way. When you go to school, I'm crying too because I love you. So when you frame grief as love, as this is how we love people, now the grief has a purpose. It's about the expression of love. You see, we're not scared of grief now. Now we lean into the grief. And the second very important thing I need to remind you of is that the most important gift that your Nicholas would want for mommy and the rest of the family is to live in the present moment and to enjoy with gratitude all the bounty you do have. And I don't mean this as a way to make you bypass your grief. You know, sometimes people use gratitude as a way to bypass grief. I don't want you to do that. But I do want you to remember that you do have two beautiful boys. And your way of honoring Nicholas is to honor Nikolai and the older brother. Every time you enjoy them, every time you celebrate them and be with them, you are honoring his memory. So if you really want to honor the child who has passed on, he would want for you to be present to his brothers who are living right now. That's your way. And you can say, Nicholas, I'm doing this for you. It's really hard today, but I'm going to do it because this is my way of showing you love. This is my way of reminding you that you were important to me.
So I will definitely incorporate it and try to change that. Maybe I feel like putting my energy into including him instead of putting my energy in terms of pushing that feeling away will be much more positive, because I feel like I'm using more energy trying to push him away than including him in.
Exactly. Your son who passed on is here to teach you so much more about being an accepting mother, a present mother, a more loving mother. He's here to remind you that although he's passed on, your love still exists for those who live. And you can use him to remind you of that. But yes, when we suppress our grief, when we try to push it aside, we spend more energy and then we're exhausted and we're living this fake pretend life, and that never works. And your oldest son is showing you, he's talking about it with his friends, he's talking about it with his teachers, he's getting the help he needs. And let me tell you, by you coming here today and being brave to talk about it, you've not only helped me, so I thank you, but you've helped so many listeners who also think that they should push away their grief. And that makes more sense, but it really doesn't. So you're here to remind us all that it's okay to grieve. It's okay to integrate that loss in our daily life. And let's lean into the pain, because our tendency is to run away from pain. Our children are here to teach us that it's okay. We can handle these big feelings. We can do it through love. We can do it through acceptance and gratitude. So, this is your big lesson and your big teaching for us all.
Just talking about it right now, it feels liberating, I have to say. People have been telling me you need to get professional help, you need to talk about it. And I always say, yeah, I don't have time. I have to take care of the kids, I have to do this, I have to do that. And it actually feels liberating. And I thank you for opening that space for me to be able to talk about it.
Oh, thank you so much, Stacy. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you.
Coming up next, a mother who is in the throes of struggling with her child's pain. We're going to talk to Tracy. Tracy is a mother who is parenting her 3 children alone. Her children are suffering, and so is she, because her husband, their father, passed away with cancer 4 years ago. She's experiencing particular difficulties with her 16-year-old, who is having a really hard time managing her grief. Hi, Tracy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, I know that this must be the most unbelievably painful struggle you've been in. So, I feel so honored and humbled that you're willing to share your experience so that others can learn. So, take a moment to just tell us in your own words how these past 4 years has been for you since your husband passed away.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a journey with raising my children solo, and you kind of rediscover who you are as a person on this journey alone. I think you become much closer to your children because, it's all we have is each other. I've had to watch them go through their different emotions of grief, and it kind of, goes up and down. And I think my 16-year-old has definitely, kind of bottled up her emotions. And then, with her, she was a competitive volleyball player and she put her energy into, and, she had a situation at school where it was one of her dad's favorite movies that played. And ever since that day, it just sort of like catapulted her in, this situational depression. And she quit volleyball. She hasn't physically gone to school. And I'm now enrolling her in a recovery program to make up the credits. But it hit her just kind of out of nowhere.
So, how long was their father suffering for before he eventually passed away?
2 years.
So, we're talking about a 6-year period of grief and upheaval and emotional overwhelm. So, the family has been going through so much for the past 6 years.
Yes.
And that would make your daughter almost 10 years old when all this began.
Yeah.
And we know that, pre-adolescence is a very stormy period, especially for girls who are discovering their identity. So this happened right in the middle of her own foray into adulthood. So you said that she bottled up her emotions for quite a while. What do you mean by that?
Well, she's not really a person who likes to express herself anyway. So I think it just started to kind of erupt. And I think maybe part of my kids' journey in healing catapulted them into healing, because then I kind of did a deep dive into my own deep healing. And I think them seeing me go through that kind of helped them heal a little bit too.
Yes, absolutely. She was quite functional until this episode at school where she watched this movie and has unraveled since then.
Correct.
Would you say that it's almost as if she had suppressed her grief until now and bottled it up?
Yes, 1,000%.
And then here comes this trigger, right? This movie that was a favorite movie of one of her favorite people who's no longer here. And it just evoked the old trauma and she just couldn't contain it anymore.
Correct.
Right. So you know that that's quite normal, right? Like that happens to a lot of people, that they experience grief in episodic waves. It's not just, the event happens, I process, I purge, I let go, I surrender, I transform, I move on. Grief works in these very sporadic waves, and we don't really know when the next wave is going to come. And it sounds like she just had her real first big, experience of a memory being re-traumatizing for her,
Yes.
and she didn't know how to handle it.
No. And I didn't know how to handle it for her as a parent because I'm also grieving. So I'm trying to lift up my children grieving as I'm grieving. And that takes a lot of strength to do that.
Yeah, because you're trying to lift these big boulders with a tiny finger, it seems. It feels like the proportion of the grief is like a boulder, and you're just this tiny little finger in comparison. Maybe you're trying to lift them out has some anchor in your being anxious watching them experience that grief. So let's go a little deeper and try to understand, why are you trying to lift her up?
Well, one, because she's my daughter and I see her suffering and I'm an empath. So I feel it so deeply that I've almost, stopped my healing to focus on their healing and to help them because I've spent so much time in my own path that I also need to be more aware of their path and help them because they need me and I'm all that they have.
Yes, I agree with you. But I think sometimes we mistake what true help during these very difficult times needs to look like. We think sometimes that it needs to look like anything other than it is. And we try to move our children out of their deep pain because it makes us so helpless. It makes us feel like we are failing as parents, watching them crumble. But sometimes, and especially I think in times of grief like this, it's important to teach our children not that it is an unhealthy thing to grieve, but that it's an unhealthy thing to stop ourselves from feeling our feelings and to believe that we cannot handle it. So instead of shifting the mood, let's shift our approach, our relationship to the mood. So, for example, when you see her crying, your instinct may be to say, let's go for a walk, or let's dance, or let's listen to the birds, which are all very good and very important ways to shift someone's mood. But what if instead we shifted her relationship to her mood in this way? Yeah, I understand. This is normal. You're not alone in feeling like this. This is natural. So we first validate the experience, which I know you do, and then you empathize, which is by saying, I felt it too. Most kids would feel like this. And then we normalize her even more. And then what we can do is transform that relationship she has to her grief, as in, we say something like this: these feelings are here as a messenger to remind you of what a beautiful relationship you had. These feelings are here also to remind you that you can cope. You are brave. The fact that you can feel means that you can handle the feeling as well. I think sometimes when we have feelings that feel scary, we feel like they're going to drown us. And changing our relationship to these feelings means learning that even though the storms and the waves of these emotions can come, we have the lifeboat, we have the oar, we have the paddle, and we have the life jacket all within us. And that is a precious gift you can give her. But it all comes down to you believing that you have the lifeboat and the oar and the paddle inside you.
Definitely.
So when you watch her going through the spiral of grief, what comes up for you in that moment?
I feel like I'm grateful that I have done the work internally inside, because I feel like I didn't deal with it myself, which in turn didn't help my children probably deal with their grief. So now I'm in a better spot emotionally to handle it, where I am solid, where I'm not breaking down, right, about it. So I have a good platform where then now I can, it's sort of like putting the oxygen mask on yourself first and then you
Yes.
help others. So
Yes.
I've learned to do that for myself. And then now I'm helping my children because I've done the work for myself.
Yes.
And I know it kind of sounds selfish, but I needed to do that.
Yeah. So what you're saying is you at first didn't know that you had your own lifeboat or paddle and life jacket. And now you've learned the tools. You can survive. You can sustain this unimaginable pain. You are stronger than the pain, right?
Yes.
You're not so afraid of that pain anymore.
No.
And perhaps that's why your daughter waited in a subconscious way to break down when she knew that you would be better equipped to handle it.
And I think you're right, because I think my healing started their journey. And there's something kind of holistic about that approach. And, we do honor him, and he's around. We feel him, like he leaves us messages and signs and numbers and talk. Like he's literally around us and we feel him. And my kids feel him too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now your daughter, by watching you not be so afraid of the grief, by watching how the grief is not tearing you down and breaking you into pieces, watching you handle the waves of grief, but standing anchored, is going to give her the strength and the courage that, yes, this grief is so torrential, it's so painful, it hurts, but I can be anchored in my own strength and I can weather this storm. However, in order to get there, you're going to have to witness your daughter flounder as you have been. So, yes, it means that she's dropping out of school, not participating in activities. Maybe she needs some individual grief therapy. Maybe she needs to go to a program. So you're going to have to now stand really strong while she drifts away from her duties, so to speak, as a student and prioritizes herself. It's like she has to leave mainstream school to go to her school to learn the skills to deal with this unimaginable trauma in her life.
And it's hard because I feel like I'm giving her a lot of soft love and not tough love, because I think that for me as a parent, I can't punish her for having these kind of feelings. Like
Exactly.
she's heavily grieving. So I
Exactly.
have to be like soft love with her. And it's her journey. I have to kind of like give her guidance, but not come down hard, because she's a 16-year-old who lost her best friend and her heart is broken.
Exactly. What a wonderful, empathic, and sensitive mother you're being. So I'm here to tell you that you're doing a beautiful job in supporting your daughter. And grief has no timetable, and grief is not linear, and it doesn't follow a script. It can show up at any time. And what's more important is not that it is showing up, but how it's being allowed to be processed. And that's what you're giving her, this invaluable gift of processing her deep, authentic grief so that she can integrate it into her life and move on. But we cannot move on if we haven't done the work, like you said, if we haven't worked through the process of feeling all those feelings that she had bottled up until now. You are saving her from one day becoming perhaps an addict or one day acting it all out because it got so bottled up that it erupted one day. You are giving her a gift. So instead of seeing her as somebody who is not doing things or not performing beautifully or not checking off the boxes, let's reframe this as what a positive thing she is doing for herself. She is saying that I cannot handle mainstream life right now because I need to honor passing of this beautiful relationship. I need to honor these feelings I have bottled up, and I care about myself enough to take care of what's happening within me, and I'm less concerned about what's happening outside of me. What a brave thing she's doing. And if you can keep reframing and reinforcing her for her courage, then this is actually something quote unquote successful, right? This is actually her passing the most difficult exam of her life, which is integrating the grief of her beloved father.
Yeah, I feel like she's gonna become like a better person because of it. You know, she like becoming like a next level in herself. Like it's sort of like you have to, hit rock bottom to build yourself up back again. You know.
Exactly. And she's actually doing something that she technically, quote unquote, should have done years ago. So she's actually now catching up. And I really do believe it's correlated to your checking out. And so, therefore, she was in her body and surviving. And now that she's reached the safe harbors of her mother's courage, she can now fall apart. And you are standing strong, a lighthouse, an anchor, the boat for her to stay moored, bobbing on the waves and not drowning under. So, this is your sacred opportunity now to show up for your child. And I know that there's conflict around college and exams and volleyball but because you've experienced life's most harsh lesson of all, those things don't matter when death is at the door.
Yeah. Sometimes I hear my 14-year-old like sobbing in her room at night over her dad, and she called his old phone number, and she just, wanted to just see if it was still his phone or not. And then it wasn't, and it was someone else's number. And they're like, sorry, you have the wrong number. And, it's like those little things that still haunt my children. You know what I mean? About wanting to hear his voice again, right? Just missing him. And he was bigger than life. And he was like Superman and Iron Man put together. The fact that like cancer got him is baffling, because he was literally the toughest man we knew. And my kids, they missed him because he had a big personality, a big presence.
Yes. And the more they integrate his beauty and see it as part of themselves and you, then they realize that they don't need to forget about him or yearn for him because he exists inside each of you. And there's an aspect of him that lives on through you and them. And watching your strength and watching your resilience is very, very important for them to model after. Not that you need to be a superhuman and a stoic person, but actually, when they see that you have a very strong and presence filled connection with your own grief, you're not scared of your grief, that is the root of their healing. A strong person is not someone who doesn't experience grief. A strong person is someone who's developed a very comfortable and integrated relationship with their grief and their feelings. So when they see that you're comfortable, that grief doesn't take you down, that you're not terrified, locking yourself up every time you feel grief, but that you can cry and you can drive and you can sing and you can still cry and you can dance and you can still move on and you can still cry, that is integrated in your life, they're going to then realize, oh, okay, I can cry forever. I can always miss him, but it doesn't mean I have to stop living. So that's what integration means, that you can bring the grief along with you, and it'll always be in the car with you all on a drive. It'll always be in the bed as you sleep. But you can also move on, right? But when we treat grief as if it's anathema and it's a curse and we're terrified of it, it actually stops us from moving on. Let's invite the grief into your home. Let's allow it. Let's not hide from it. We're not scared of it anymore, because grief is really a love song to your husband, to your beloved, beautiful father of your children. It's not something negative. It's something that is speaking to the beauty and the love in your family. So that's what integration is. So if you can reframe it, now you're realizing, oh, I'm not in a bad place. This is actually exactly where I'm supposed to be. Tracy, don't worry about the grades. Don't worry about college. Don't worry about her exams. Right now, your daughter is honoring her grief, which is an
Yeah.
extremely important thing for her to do.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you taking the time for me today.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
We are all afraid of dealing with big, painful emotions, especially when it has to do with death. Death is really a tough one for all of us to cope with, and it brings us to our knees. The only way through the grief around death and loss is to feel all the feelings that come up. When we suppress our feelings, when we hide them, when we run away from them or distract ourselves from them, they only become bigger and begin to split off and show up in different ways, either through an addiction or through anger or frustration. Whenever we're experiencing big feelings or when we're grieving the death of a loved one, it is always more therapeutic to allow the space to safely feel those feelings. 15 minutes a day, perhaps, or when we take a walk in the evening, or when we sit quietly at night. It's always important to find the time to allow ourselves to feel those feelings. This is the way through grief. Anything less than feeling the feelings will show up in a disembodied, dysfunctional way in some other part of our lives. When we have children who we are helping through grief, it is really important to allow them as well to have the space and the safety to feel those big feelings without shame, without control. It's hard. Pain is painful, but the only way to get to the other side of pain is through it. If you've suffered from a loss or are going through a really hard time grieving, then I hope you found this episode helpful. And I will see you on the next episode of Parenting and You with me, Dr. Shefali. Parenting and You with Dr. Shefali is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional medical, psychological, psychotherapeutic, coaching, healthcare, or other qualified professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment.